Would you ever forgive your own family if they asked you to sit in the back row at your grandson's wedding? That's exactly what happened to me. But what was meant to shame me before a church full of people ended up turning into their downfall. My name is Eleanor Henderson. I am 76 years old, a widow, and the grandmother of the groom. I raised my son, watched him succeed, supported him through his early years when money was tight, and I stood by him during storms most parents would have crumbled under. I carried more for that family than they will ever acknowledge. And yet, when the most important day of my grandson Michael's life arrived, my daughter-in-law Susan handed me an instruction that cut me to my core. You'll sit in the back row. The family area is reserved. To understand how crushing those words were, you have to know the life I have lived. I reside in the same modest home in Boston that my late husband Arthur and I purchased more than 50 years ago. That house is filled with our laughter, our arguments, our dreams, and the kind of memories that can't be replaced. Arthur's passing 5 years ago left me with an emptiness I thought nothing could match. But at least I still had my family, or so I believed. Michael, my grandson, once adored me. I was the one who changed his diapers, baked him warm apple pie on chilly evenings, and held his hand when he learned to ride a bike. His smile used to light up when he saw me, and he'd tell me about school, his friends, his dreams. But as time passed, and as Susan's influence grew stronger, that bond weakened. I was no longer the grandmother he ran to. I became a distant obligation. So when the wedding invitation arrived, tucked inside was not just a card of joy but an instruction that would stain my heart. To them, I was no longer a part of the inner circle of family. I was a seat filler, a woman pushed aside. Before I share how this shocking day unfolded, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and tell us where you're watching from. Arthur, my late husband, was my anchor in every sense. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he was a steady one. He believed in honesty, kindness, and the kind of loyalty you don't often see anymore. We raised our son David in that small Boston home, teaching him to value people above possessions. I thought those lessons had taken root. But somewhere along the way, David grew into someone I barely recognize. A successful lawyer now, he lives with Susan, his wife of nearly 40 years, in a sprawling house in Wellesley. Their life revolves around country clubs, charity galas, and expensive vacations. My role in his world has grown smaller with each passing year, reduced to quick phone calls on holidays or rushed dinners that feel more like obligations than visits filled with love. Susan, my daughter-in-law, has always carried herself with an air of superiority. From the day David brought her home, she made it clear that her world was one of appearances and status. To her, I was the plain widow in the modest house on Magnolia Lane, a reminder of the life David came from but now wished to forget. Her politeness was always icy, her smiles carefully measured. With Susan, you never knew if her words were meant to include you or to quietly push you out. Then there was Michael, my sweet grandson. He was the boy who once climbed into my lap, begging for one more bedtime story. The boy I walked to school when his parents were too busy. The boy who once said, "Grandma, you're my best friend." I never imagined that time and distance could change a child's heart so drastically. But as he grew older, his calls became shorter, his visits fewer. He followed in his parents' world of busyness and appearances. Still, I convinced myself that deep down, the bond we shared was unbreakable. That illusion shattered the day I opened the envelope that carried the wedding invitation. The heavy cardstock should have felt like an honor, but the smaller insert tucked inside was a cold slap. It didn't say reserved for honored family. It told me plainly that my place was in the back, away from where the real family would sit. I held that note for a long time, rereading the words until they blurred. I thought of my mother, who had sat proudly in the front at David's wedding. I thought of Arthur, who would have demanded respect for me without hesitation. Now, it felt as though decades of love, sacrifice, and loyalty could be erased with one sentence from Susan's hand. I considered calling David immediately after reading that dreadful note. Part of me wanted to demand an explanation, to remind him of every sacrifice I had made for him and his family. But I could already hear the excuses forming in his voice. "Mom, it's just a matter of space. You know how small churches can be." He would dismiss my hurt as though it were trivial, the way he had brushed aside so many of my feelings over the years. Susan's reaction, I knew, would sting even more. She would coat her words in sugar but lace them with dismissal. "Oh, Eleanor, it's really for your comfort. The back rows have more legroom, and you'll have an easier time slipping out if you get tired." A smile on her lips, but triumph in her eyes. That was Susan's way, always hiding her insults behind a mask of polite reason. So, I folded the note and tucked it back into the envelope, holding my tongue. It wasn't silence born of acceptance. No. It was the silence of a woman who understood that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is not rushing to defend yourself. It was the silence of observation, of waiting. Still, the ache wouldn't leave me. I thought back to David's wedding decades earlier. Arthur and I had sat proudly in the second row, my mother in the front, tears in her eyes as she watched her grandson marry. No one had questioned her place of honor. That was family. That was respect. And now I was being pushed aside, relegated to what they called the overflow section. Overflow. As though I were no more significant than extra water spilling past the rim of a glass. Nights grew heavier as the wedding approached. My home felt quieter than usual, the tick of the clock on Magnolia Lane echoing through rooms filled with memories. I stared at the photographs lining my mantel. Michael's first birthday, his graduation day, Christmas mornings where his eyes sparkled brighter than the tree lights. In every frame, I was there. Present. Loving. Needed. Yet now, I was being made invisible. It is a cruel thing to give so much of your life to a family, only to be told in such a calculated way that you no longer matter. As the days slipped by, I tried to distract myself with my usual routines, brewing my morning tea, tending the bird feeder, arranging books at the library where I volunteered. Yet the thought of that back row seat haunted me. Every time I pictured Michael standing at the altar, I imagined myself straining to see his face from a distance, like a stranger rather than his grandmother. My neighbor Martha visited one afternoon. She spoke of her son moving her mother into a home, not because she was ill, but because she took up too much space. Her words hit me like a stone. "It's like we become invisible, Eleanor. They see gray hair, wrinkles, and forget everything else we are." That conversation echoed in my mind. Invisible. Yes, that was the very word Susan and David seemed determined to stamp across my forehead. But I am not a woman easily erased. I have lived through loss, through the death of the man who made my world whole, through years of holding a family together when money was scarce and hope was fragile. I had thought age might soften the blows life throws at us. Instead, it revealed the cold reality that sometimes the ones you love most can wound you deepest. The wedding day inched closer, and each tick of the calendar pressed the insult deeper into my chest. I began to wonder, not about my seat, but about what lay beneath their need to push me aside. Why insist on humiliating me so openly? Why risk the whispers of guests who would surely notice my absence from the front rows? It felt like more than vanity. It felt like they wanted me distracted, small, focused on the sting of embarrassment so I wouldn't notice something else. That thought would sit with me like an unanswered riddle. Still, I told myself I would go. I would walk into that church with dignity, even if they wanted me hidden away. And I would not give them the satisfaction of tears. What I didn't know then was that my quiet acceptance of that back row seat would become my greatest weapon. As the wedding approached, I found myself reflecting on all the sacrifices that had carried my family to where they stood now. I thought back to David's early years when Arthur and I scraped together what we could to pay for his law school tuition. I remembered the nights we skipped dinners out, the vacations we never took, also he could have the opportunities we never did. He made his career on the foundation of our quiet sacrifices, but somewhere along the way, gratitude turned into distance. I remembered long weekends when Susan went away on her so-called retreats, and it was me who cared for Michael. I cooked his meals, read him bedtime stories, even soothed his nightmares. There were weeks when my little house on Magnolia Lane rang with the laughter of a child, while his parents were absent. Back then, I told myself I was fortunate. I was needed. But standing in my kitchen years later, holding that invitation that placed me in the back row, I realized how easily memories fade when convenience dictates it. The rehearsal dinner came sooner than I expected. I had chosen to wear the sapphire dress Arthur had given me for our 40th anniversary. It wasn't just clothing. It was a statement that I was still Eleanor Henderson, still a woman with pride, even if they wanted to shrink me down to a shadow. The moment I stepped into the country club's grand hall, I could feel Susan's touch in every detail. Glittering chandeliers, polished cutlery, elegant centerpieces. It was the kind of event designed to impress, not to comfort. A young attendant checked my name and directed me, not to the main hall where the family and wedding party gathered, but to a smaller adjoining room. There, tucked away from the glow and laughter, was a table pushed into a corner. Waiting at that table were my cousin Helen, a frail woman in her 80s, and Robert, my great-nephew who had flown in from Chicago. Helen greeted me with a weary smile, whispering, "Feels like a punishment, doesn't it?" From where we sat, we could see the main celebration, a lively scene with toasts, music, and laughter spilling out into the night. At the head table sat David and Susan, raising glasses with Brittany's parents, their smiles radiant for all to see. Michael sat at the center of it all, smiling, laughing. But to me, it felt forced. His eyes darted often, as though something weighed heavily on him. I sat down, lifting a forkful of food that suddenly tasted like ashes. I wasn't just away from the family. I was being erased from their story. I tried to make polite conversation at our corner table, but every sound from the main hall pulled my attention away. Laughter rose and fell like waves, toasts clinked, and the glow of chandeliers spilled warmth on everyone but us. Our little table felt like an island cut off from the rest of the world. Helen leaned closer and whispered, "Do you see where they put us? Out of sight, out of mind." Her words carried no bitterness, just resignation. Robert, quiet and thoughtful, fiddled with his napkin. I could tell he was uneasy, too polite to say what he was thinking. The worst sting came when Susan appeared, gliding through the room as though she were queen of the evening. Her gown shimmered in the light, her smile rehearsed to perfection. She stopped at our table, speaking just loud enough for others nearby to hear. "Eleanor," she said, "isn't this corner lovely? So much quieter than the bustle of the main room. Perfect for a conversation." Her voice carried sweetness, but her eyes told another story, sharp, measuring, almost satisfied. I forced a polite smile, unwilling to give her the reaction she wanted. "Yes," I said softly, "plenty of space." Susan's smile widened. "Oh, before I forget, Michael mentioned that he already arranged some family photos with you earlier. He thought it would be better to take care of them before the wedding chaos. That way you won't feel rushed." Her words struck me like ice water. Family photos? Those were one of the few things I had looked forward to, a chance to stand with Michael, to capture a moment we could both treasure. But Susan's tone left no doubt. Those pictures had been taken without me, or perhaps not taken at all. It wasn't about saving me trouble. It was about excluding me from the official record of the day. For a brief moment, I thought of Arthur. He had always insisted on capturing every family milestone with a photograph. "Pictures keep us together, Ellie," he used to say. I could almost hear his voice in that crowded hall. Now, Susan was ensuring my absence would be permanent, not just from the celebration, but from the memory of it. I returned to my seat with my plate untouched, the laughter from the main tables now sounding hollow, almost mocking. I sat straighter, my sapphire dress catching the light, refusing to shrink into the shadows. They could push me aside, but they would not erase me. Not completely. As the evenings stretched on, I found my attention drawn again and again to Michael. From our corner table, I had a clear line of sight to the head table where he sat between his parents and Brittany. He laughed when they laughed, raised his glass when they toasted, but there was something about him that didn't ring true. His smile looked strained, his eyes restless. He twisted his napkin in his lap when he thought no one was looking. I knew that look. It was the same nervous tic he had as a boy whenever he tried to hide something. My grandmother's instinct told me Michael was carrying a weight far heavier than wedding day jitters. At one point, I excused myself to refill my water. The buffet line curved toward a small lounge just off the main hall. As I walked past, I heard hushed voices. I slowed, the sound of my own heartbeat suddenly louder than the music spilling from the ballroom. "Dad, I don't know if I can do this." Michael's voice trembled. "It feels wrong. She's going to find out." "I know she will." David's reply was sharp, urgent. "Pull yourself together. We've gone over this. It's the only way to get her out of the picture. Her name is on everything, the house, the accounts. You heard what the lawyer said. We need her signature, and we need it tomorrow. I froze. My hand tightened around my empty glass. They were talking about me. My house. My savings. Michael's voice cracked. But if Robert keeps asking questions about the sale, he's an accountant. He'll figure it out. He already suspects something. Sale? My house was being sold? A cold wave passed through me, so strong I had to steady myself against the wall. David lowered his voice, but I was close enough to catch every word. We just need to make it through the ceremony. The document is ready. Father Miller will sign as a witness. After the vows, we'll hand it to her and say it's a simple form to finalize the records. She won't question it. By the time she realizes, it'll be too late. I pressed myself against the corner of the wall, trembling, trying to breathe quietly. In that instant, everything made sense. The back row, the quiet table, the missing photos. They weren't just humiliations. They were distractions. They wanted me so consumed with feeling unwanted that I wouldn't see the real theft happening in plain sight. My humiliation had been nothing more than a curtain, hiding a far greater betrayal. I stayed hidden in the shadow of that hallway for what felt like an eternity, my breath shallow, my mind racing. Every word I had overheard replayed in my head like a drumbeat. The house, the accounts. Father Miller will sign. She won't question it. The people I loved most, my own son, my grandson, were plotting to strip away the life Arthur and I had built together. And the priest, a man I had thought was present to bless a marriage, was set to lend his name to the scheme. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself to move. I slipped back to our corner table, my face composed into something polite, but inside I was reeling. Helen asked if I was all right, her voice tinged with concern. I nodded, managing a faint smile, though my hands trembled in my lap. Robert studied me carefully, his sharp eyes catching the shift in my demeanor, but he said nothing. I glanced back toward the main table. David was laughing again, his arm draped casually over the back of Susan's chair. Susan raised her glass, her smile wide and gracious for all to see. Michael clapped at something one of Brittany's relatives had said, though his hands shook slightly as he did. To anyone else, it looked like a joyful evening. To me, it was a stage play, costumes, lines, and a script designed to fool every guest in the room. As I sat in silence, an icy clarity settled over me. The back row seat wasn't meant simply to belittle me. It was part of a careful performance, meant to distract me with insult so I wouldn't see the larger theft unfolding behind the curtain. I had walked into that dinner believing I was being excluded from memories. The truth was far more dangerous. They were attempting to erase me from my own life. I thought of Arthur once more. What would he have done? He had always told me, "Ellie, the moment you think you're beaten is the moment you've already lost." His words carried me through that night. I knew I could not confront them here. To reveal what I knew too soon would give them time to adjust their plan. No, if they believed me to be weak and humiliated, then that was the mask I would wear until the moment came to tear theirs away. I straightened my shoulders in my chair, lifted my glass, and forced myself to smile. Outwardly, I was the quiet grandmother tucked away in a corner. Inwardly, I was preparing for battle. Have you ever seen a family hide betrayal behind a smile? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know your experiences. The drive home from the rehearsal dinner felt endless. Street lights flickered past the windshield, but I barely noticed them. My mind was trapped in the echo of David's words, each one heavier than the last. The house, the accounts, she won't question it. When I pulled into the driveway of my little home on Magnolia Lane, it no longer felt like a safe place. Every chair, every framed photo, every chipped teacup now seemed under threat. This house wasn't just brick and wood. It was Arthur's legacy, our life together, the soil in which all our memories were rooted. And now, my own flesh and blood was preparing to take it from me. I sank into my favorite armchair, the same one Arthur had sat in while reading the newspaper on quiet Sunday mornings. For a long time, I sat there with my hands clasped, fighting the urge to cry. But tears would not help me now. What David and Michael had planned was not simply cruel. It was theft, and if I didn't act, I would lose everything. I thought first of a lawyer. Surely that was the sensible step. But the moment I pictured David's face, I knew it would be useless. He would find a way to spin it, to claim I was confused, to buy himself time. Time was the one luxury I did not have. The wedding was tomorrow. Whatever trap they had laid, it was ready to spring. That's when I thought of Robert. My great-nephew, sitting quietly at our corner table, had looked at me more carefully than anyone else that night. He had seen something in my expression that others missed. Robert worked as an accountant. He was no stranger to contracts, filings, and numbers that didn't add up. More importantly, I trusted him. He wasn't tied to David and Susan's world of appearances. The clock in the hallway struck midnight. My hand shook slightly as I picked up the phone, but I dialed his number anyway. He answered groggily, his voice thick with sleep. "Robert? It's Eleanor. I'm sorry for calling at this hour, but I can't wait until morning." At once, his tone sharpened. "Is everything all right?" "No," I whispered. "I overheard something tonight. Something about my house. About my accounts. David and Michael, they're planning to make me sign something tomorrow. And they said a priest will act as witness." There was silence, followed by the rustle of sheets. Robert was awake now, and he understood the gravity in my voice. Robert's voice grew firm. "A priest? That doesn't sound right at all. A clergyman's role is spiritual, not legal. If they want him as a witness, it's because they're trying to make you believe you're signing something ceremonial. Eleanor, you cannot sign a single page tomorrow. Not one." "I don't intend to," I replied, though my chest felt tight. But they were speaking as if it's already in motion, as if it's more than just a plan. "Stay on the line," Robert said. "Give me a few minutes. I'll check something." I sat in silence, listening to the soft clacking of his keyboard through the receiver. My hands twisted the edge of Arthur's old Afghan draped across the chair, the one he used to pull around his shoulders on cool evenings. Arthur had always told me I was stronger than I believed. I clung to that now. 10 minutes passed before Robert returned, his voice carrying a new urgency. "Eleanor, you were right. I checked the municipal filings. There's a preliminary deed transfer application already submitted for your address, with David listed as the grantee. It was filed 2 weeks ago. They've started the process." My throat tightened. "They've already tried to take my house?" "Yes," Robert said. "And that's not all." I looked into David's firm. There are lawsuits piling up, debts beyond what he can manage. It looks like he's scrambling to cover enormous losses. He isn't protecting you. He's trying to use your assets to shield himself. I closed my eyes, swallowing hard. I had once believed my son's success was built on the sacrifices Arthur and I had made. Now I saw it for what it was, a castle built on sand, and he was willing to bury me beneath it to keep the walls standing a little longer. "Robert," I whispered, "how do I fight this?" There was a pause, then his reply came steady and sure. "We don't confront them tonight. That gives them time to change the plan. You go to that wedding, you sit in the back row, and you let them think they've beaten you. But we'll be ready. I'll be there watching. If they try to put anything in front of you, we'll make sure the truth is known before you sign a thing." For the first time all evening, I felt a spark of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. When Robert fell silent, I sat back in Arthur's chair, staring at the empty space where his pipe rack used to sit. He had been gone 5 years, yet in moments like this, I could almost feel him beside me. Arthur would never have let David talk him into handing over the deed to this house. He would have stood his ground with calm authority. "Arthur," I whispered into the quiet room, "I wish you were here. You'd know what to do." But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe it wasn't about what he would do. It was about what he had always taught me. Strength doesn't shout, Ellie. Strength waits until the right moment, and then speaks so clearly that no one can ignore it. Robert's voice broke into my thoughts. "Eleanor, are you still there?" "Yes," I said, steadying my breath. "I'm here." "Good. Because we need to be clear. Tomorrow you'll be under pressure. They'll try to dress it up, make it sound routine. But you must remember, they're desperate. This isn't about your comfort. It's about their survival." His words hit hard, but they cleared the fog from my mind. "So what do we do?" "We play along," Robert said. "You sit in the back row, just like they told you. You nod, you smile. You let them think you're too hurt to question anything. Meanwhile, I'll keep my eyes open. If they present that document, you stall. Ask questions, delay long enough for me to step in. And if it comes to it, his voice tightened. You expose them in front of everyone. I thought about that for a long moment. The idea of standing in front of a church full of people, calling out my own son and grandson, felt unbearable. But then I pictured Arthur's hands building the shelves in our living room, Michael's tiny fingers clutching mine when he was a boy, and the thought of losing all of it because of David's greed burned away my hesitation. They've already taken so much from me, I said quietly. I won't let them take the rest. Not my house. Not my dignity. That's the spirit, Robert replied. Tomorrow you wear that sapphire dress. You told me Arthur bought it for you, right? Wear it like armor. Let them see the grandmother they thought was too weak to fight back. For the first time in days, I smiled. Not a forced smile, but a real one. Arthur may have been gone, but his strength lived on in me. Tomorrow they would see it. Robert stayed on the line with me as the hours crept toward dawn. What began as a frantic call for help turned into the careful weaving of a strategy. His voice was calm, precise, the kind of steady tone that steadied me too. First, he said, tomorrow you act exactly as they expect. You walk into that church and sit in the back row. Don't argue, don't push back. If they think you're distracted by the insult, they won't see you watching. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Yes, I'll let them believe I've accepted it. Second, he continued, if they bring out a document, you don't sign. Stall if you have to. Pretend you can't read the fine print, or that your glasses are smudged. Anything to buy time. I let out a shaky laugh. That won't be hard at my age. No one expects an old woman to read quickly. That's to your advantage, Robert replied. They're under pressure. Desperation makes people sloppy. We discussed more possibilities. If Susan tried to corner me, I would deflect politely. If David pressed, I would ask questions. If Michael faltered, as I suspected he might, Robert would be ready to step forward. His background as an accountant meant he could recognize any legal trick on sight. Finally, Robert lowered his voice. And if the moment comes when you must expose them, you don't whisper. You stand tall, you speak clearly, and you remind every person in that church who you are. You're not just a grandmother. You're the woman who built the foundation they've all been standing on. The words brought a lump to my throat. I remembered Arthur telling me once, Ellie, your strength isn't in raising your voice. It's in the way people listen when you finally choose to speak. By the time we ended the call, the first rays of morning light had begun to creep across the sky. I rose from Arthur's chair and went to my closet. Hanging there, wrapped carefully in plastic, was the sapphire dress. The fabric shimmered as I slid it free, and I ran my hand along the neckline where Arthur's fingers had once fastened a necklace on our anniversary. Tomorrow, it wouldn't just be a dress. It would be my shield. My declaration that I was not invisible, not disposable, and certainly not powerless. I closed my eyes and drew a steady breath. Whatever they had planned, I would be ready. What would you have done in my place? Would you confront them immediately, or wait for the perfect moment? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The morning of the wedding arrived crisp and bright, the kind of autumn day New England is famous for. The trees outside my window blazed with red and gold, but their beauty did little to calm the storm inside me. I dressed slowly, smoothing the sapphire gown over my shoulders, fastening the pearl earrings Arthur had given me on our 25th anniversary. In the mirror, I saw not a frail widow, but a woman prepared for battle. By the time I reached the church, the parking lot was already filled with guests in tailored suits and flowing dresses. The grand stone building loomed ahead, its stained glass windows catching the light of the rising sun. I walked through the heavy oak doors, the scent of polished wood and candle wax filling the air. A soft hum of conversation drifted through the pews as people took their seats. Susan spotted me first. She offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes, then motioned to the back corner pew. There was my place. A row so far from the altar that I might as well have been a spectator instead of family. I walked slowly down the aisle, my heels clicking against the marble floor, refusing to slouch or shrink. I sat where I had been told, straight-backed and composed, though my heart pounded with anticipation. From the shadows of the back row, I had a clear view of everything. Guests whispered and shifted, stealing glances toward the front where David and Susan sat proudly. Michael stood stiffly at the altar, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes darting nervously. Brittany entered moments later, radiant in a gown of white silk, her smile polished for the crowd. The organ swelled, voices hushed, and the ceremony began. Father Miller, the priest I now knew to be part of the scheme, stepped forward. His voice boomed with practiced warmth as he spoke of love, family, and unity. I heard none of it. My eyes never left David's face. He looked calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes when a man believes he has already won. The vows were exchanged. Rings slipped onto trembling fingers, and for a moment the church seemed to hold its breath. Then Father Miller cleared his throat. As many of you know, he said, marriage is not only a union between two people, but a bond between families. Today we wish to honor that bond. As a tribute to the generations who built this family, we ask the groom's grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor Henderson, to join us at the altar and sign a very special family document. It will serve as a testament to love and continuity. A ripple of whispers swept through the pews. Heads turned. People craned their necks to look toward the back row, toward me. I rose slowly, smoothing my dress, and began the long walk down the aisle. Every step echoed against the stone floor. Every eye was on me. They thought I was walking into a trap. But they were wrong. The aisles stretched before me like a stage, each step measured, deliberate. Guests whispered behind cupped hands, unsure if this was an honor or an oddity. I caught Michael's eyes as I drew closer. His face was pale, his jaw tight, and for a heartbeat, I saw the little boy he used to be, frightened, cornered, searching for a way out. At the altar, Susan reached for my arm with a carefully practiced smile. Her grip was light, but her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "We're so glad you could be part of this, Eleanor," she said softly, though I knew her words were meant as much for the audience as for me. "Of course," I replied evenly, holding her gaze. "Family always comes first." Father Miller gestured toward a lectern draped in white cloth. On top lay a folder of papers, a pen placed neatly beside it. "This," he announced to the congregation, "is a symbolic document representing the merging of families, witnessed here today as a sacred act." Sacred. The word twisted in my gut. I stepped forward, my eyes scanning the papers as he opened the folder. What lay inside was no family blessing. Bold letters spelled out deed of transfer. Beneath that, a neatly stapled set of forms granting power of attorney. My signature line gleamed at the bottom, waiting to strip me of everything Arthur and I had built. Susan's voice, warm and poisonous, whispered at my side, "All you need to do is sign, Eleanor. It's just formality. Imagine how proud Arthur would be to see you honoring the next generation this way." My hand hovered above the pen, but I did not reach for it. Instead, I lifted my eyes to David. His confident mask slipped for just a moment when he saw the clarity in mine. He knew. I knew. "Father," I said, my voice steady but strong enough to carry through the pews, "you told this congregation this was a family document. But I see no mention of love or unity here. What I see is a deed to my home, and a transfer of control over my savings." The room fell silent. A sharp gasp came from the front rows. David leaned toward me, his voice a harsh whisper. "Mother, stop this. You're making a scene. Just sign it and we'll explain later." "No," I said firmly, raising my head high. "The time for quiet acceptance has passed." Gasps rippled again through the church. Michael's hands trembled at his sides. Brittany's smile faltered, confusion clouding her face. The trap had been laid. But instead of stepping into it, I had pulled it into the light. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of my words settle over the congregation. Dozens of faces stared back at me, confused, shocked, hungry for understanding. My son shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, his hand gripping the pew so hard his knuckles turned white. But it was Michael I turned to. His shoulders slumped, his eyes cast downward. "Michael," I said gently, though my voice carried, "did your father tell you what this really is? Did he tell you why he needs my house?" Michael's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes flicked to David, who gave the smallest shake of his head. The gesture was sharp, commanding, the kind of look that said stay quiet or else. I took a step closer, my gaze fixed on my grandson. You've been restless all evening. I've seen it. Because you know what's happening is wrong. Tell me, Michael, what did your father ask you to do? Tears pooled in his eyes. His chest heaved, but still he said nothing. Then I'll tell them for you, I continued, turning to face the crowd. This isn't about family unity. It's about desperation. David's company has collapsed under the weight of lawsuits and debt. To cover his mistakes, he planned to strip me of my home and my savings. And Michael, my voice faltered, my heart breaking even as I forced the words out. Michael helped him falsify records to hide the truth. The room erupted in gasps. Brittany clutched Michael's arm, her face blanching. Her parents exchanged horrified looks, realization dawning that their daughter had married into ruin. I pressed on, my voice ringing clear through the church. This scheme doesn't just hurt me. Do you all remember George Peterson? Murmurs rippled as heads nodded. George had been Arthur's closest friend, a man loved in our community. George trusted David with his family's future. He invested their entire retirement fund in David's firm. And because of David's greed and lies, George's family lost everything. My husband's best friend, betrayed by the very man he treated like a son. A sharp cry came from somewhere in the pews. People shifted, whispering, their gazes darting from me to David, then back again. I looked directly at Susan. Her perfect smile had vanished, her face pale, her hands twisting the hem of her dress. For once, she had no clever line, no polite dismissal. She had been exposed as complicit, her carefully maintained mask cracking before everyone. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "Mother, that's enough." His voice boomed, but the tremor in it betrayed him. "You don't know what you're saying. You're confused." "No," I said firmly, gripping the lectern for strength. "I am not confused. I see more clearly now than I have in years." Michael broke then, his sobs shattering the tension. He sank to his knees at the altar, his hands covering his face. The guests murmured, their judgment now pouring onto him as well. David lunged toward the lectern, his face twisted with fury. "You've ruined everything," he spat, his hand reaching for the folder that contained the forged deed and the power of attorney. I pulled it away, holding it aloft for all to see. "No, David. You ruined everything the moment you put greed before family. You ruined everything when you betrayed the people who trusted you most." The congregation stirred with restless energy, whispers rising into open accusations. "Is it true?" someone called. "Did he cheat the Petersons?" Another voice rose, angrier. "All those years he pretended to be honorable." Susan shot to her feet, her mask slipping at last. "This is not the time or place," she snapped, her voice shrill, desperate. But her protests only deepened the crowd's contempt. Guests exchanged knowing looks, the kind that strip away any veneer of respectability. Michael, still crumpled at the altar, let out a broken sob. Brittany pulled her arm away from him, her eyes wide with betrayal. Her parents looked at each other in horror, their daughter's marriage collapsing before it had even begun. I tapped the folder with the pen the priest had offered me, my hand steady. "You wanted me to witness a crime, but I was already a witness to years of selfishness, deceit, and cruelty. This," I held up the papers, "was supposed to be my signature of surrender. Instead, it is your confession." David's fury faltered. He glanced at the rows of guests, at the eyes now filled with disdain instead of admiration. For once, the power he had always wielded with ease slipped from his grasp. I turned back to the congregation. They told me to sit in the back row, hoping I would fade into the shadows. But from the back row, I saw everything. From the back row, I understood that my place was not behind them, but above the lies they tried to bury me under. Gasps gave way to silence, a silence so deep that even the creak of the pews seemed loud. In that silence, I placed the folder back on the lectern, untouched and signed. Then I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and began my walk back down the aisle. Each step echoed with finality. I did not rush. I did not bow my head. I walked past the shocked faces, past Susan's trembling hands, past David's clenched fists, past Michael's tear-stained cheeks. I walked with the quiet strength of a woman who had been underestimated for too long. When I reached the doors of the church, the sunlight spilled through, washing me in gold. I stepped outside into the crisp air, breathing deeply, my heart lighter than it had been in years. I had not only saved my home, I had reclaimed my dignity, my voice, my place. Back in the church, their humiliation would echo for years to come. But for me, the story was different. I was not invisible. I was Eleanor Henderson, and I had won. What lesson do you think Eleanor taught her family that day? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.